What do you do when the very people who depend on you refuse to equip you for success? I've always believed in documentation, not just for systems, but for people, for the decisions they make, especially the stupid ones. And Blake Hammond, he practically wrote his own obituary in that regard. 2 weeks ago, he came charging into my basement office like a toddler, throwing a tantrum in a business suit, face redder than an overcooked lobster, barking about how half our infrastructure is down and why didn't I fix it yet. The irony was so thick you could have spread it on toast, because just 14 days earlier, he'd personally rejected my training request. A week-long $8,500 certification in cloud infrastructure, precisely the kind of training that would have prevented what was currently making his blood pressure spike. I'm Claire Johnson, 34 Senior Network Engineer at Sage Tech Co., based in Portland, Oregon. I've kept this company's creaky digital ecosystem from collapsing for the last 4 years. The kind of job where you're invisible when things work and suddenly everyone's best friend when they don't. Sage isn't some shiny startup with beanbags and cold brew on tap. It's a Frankenstein's monster of old tech, duct taped to even older processes. A twisted maze of legacy servers that hum like dying appliances protocols that haven't seen an update since Bush was in office, and backup systems that only back up when Mercury's in retrograde. We work in the basement, literally. A converted warehouse basement where the flickering fluorescent lights could trigger an existential crisis, and the AC wheezes like a dying walrus. The walls sweat in summer and shiver in winter. I sit in the corner surrounded by towers of half-dead routers and mismatched monitors that whisper secrets in digital tongues. My setup. 3 monitors, none the same size. A mechanical keyboard I bought myself after the third company-issued one gave up. And a desk chair I got through a complex barter system involving Jake's old gaming seat and one of Lisa's backup monitors. Jake is our junior sysadmin, mid-20s boot camp grad, bright-eyed and still mildly optimistic. Lisa runs the databases like she runs her life with surgical precision and the gaze of someone who's seen more database failures than natural sunrises. Then there's Alex, our cybersecurity guy, former government, now private sector, and visibly allergic to budget cuts. 3 weeks ago, I submitted my annual training proposal, a carefully crafted 12-page document outlining ROI projections, risk assessments, and even contingency forecasts. The kind of thing that would make a finance major weep with joy and a CTO nod solemnly in approval. I was asking for 1 week, 1 training to stay ahead of the curve on the exact system Sage Tech was slowly migrating into. But the proposal didn't just sit, it withered. It became a coaster under one of Hammond's mugs. You know, the type ceramic with teamwork makes the dream work in Comic Sans. I walked past his corner office daily, watched my requests slowly become part of the decor nestled between performance reviews no one read and stress balls no one used. Then came the meeting. "Claire," he said without looking up from his phone, where I'm pretty sure he was playing solitaire, "about your training request." That tone. That MBA-honed cocktail of false sympathy and smug dismissal. I've heard it before. It's the tone used when someone's about to gut your proposal while thinking they're doing you a favor. "It's not mission critical," he said, with the air of someone who just solved poverty with a spreadsheet. "Budgets are tight. We need to focus on essential expenses only." Essential. Right. Like $2,000 ergonomic chairs for executives and catered lunches no one eats. "Sir," I replied, fighting every urge to use small words and flashcards, "this isn't just for professional development. Our systems are failing. We're on the verge of a catastrophic outage, and without proper training, I won't be able to recover modern infrastructure. We're already operating on fumes." He waved his hand like I was shooing away a fly. "You're smart, Claire. You'll figure it out. That's what we pay you for. I've been in tech long enough to recognize suicidal optimism. This was it, spelled out in bold Helvetica. I stared at him, trying to will basic comprehension into existence. Instead, I said, "Understood. I'll document our conversation accordingly." That caught his attention. His eyes snapped up alert for the first time. What's that supposed to mean? Just that I'll be noting the decision formally, for future reference. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees. In corporate documentation isn't a threat, it's a weapon, and everyone knows it. I don't appreciate the attitude, he said, his voice tight. I'm not giving attitude, I replied evenly. I'm acknowledging your decision and following protocol. When I left his office, I wasn't angry. I was strategic. Because here's the thing about systems, whether digital or human, the ones that look fine on the surface are often rotting underneath. And this one, it was overdue for collapse. It wasn't just denial, it was sabotage disguised as budget cuts. The next day, I started my quiet war. I didn't yell protest or march into Hammond's office demanding reconsideration. No, I did what every seasoned engineer in a toxic corporate environment does. I built a paper trail so meticulous it could have been used in a congressional hearing. I dug through error logs, cross-referenced dates, annotated system hiccups, and connected them to reports I'd submitted over the last year. My inbox became a living archive. Every noted thanks from Hammond, every shrugged-off warning, every deferred hardware request, they all went into a folder titled Evidence Just in Case They Blame Me. Jake noticed me staying late. "You good?" he asked one night, watching me from the doorway with the kind of concern that only someone new to the game could afford. I glanced up. Yeah, just documenting history before someone tries to rewrite it. Lisa chimed in the next morning, sliding a fresh bag of coffee beans onto my desk without a word. That's how you know someone's been through the wars with you. They bring caffeine instead of comfort. Meanwhile, Hammond strutted around like a man who thought the hard part of leadership was telling other people no. I saw him in meetings, cracking jokes, sipping overpriced coffee, pushing deadlines he didn't understand. And all I could think about was how he reminded me of a guy steering the Titanic by looking in the rearview mirror. Then quietly, the signs got worse. The primary server began throwing random memory errors blips that lasted seconds but hinted at decay deep in the system's marrow. Database lag became a daily visitor. DNS hiccups grew into full-blown seizures, but management didn't care. Why would they? From their end, everything still looked fine. And that's the problem with legacy systems. They lull you into false security, like a house built on sand that hasn't collapsed yet. To them, I was still Claire in the basement, the quiet one with the magic keyboard who fixed things they didn't understand. But inside, I was watching the countdown tick closer to 0, and Hammond. He was too busy planning the executive retreat in Lake Tahoe to notice the fuse he'd lit. That week, we had our quarterly all-hands meeting. Virtual, of course, because executives love the illusion of connection without actual contact. Hammond took the stage in front of a pixelated background that made it look like he was broadcasting from a luxury condo. "I want to thank everyone for their hard work," he said, with the conviction of a man reading a hostage note. Especially our tech teams keeping us running behind the scenes. I stared at the screen, wondering if irony could reach terminal velocity. This man had gutted our infrastructure support, denied our training, and now he was giving us shout-outs like a YouTube influencer, thanking their fans. Afterward, he sent a company-wide email titled Optimizing Operational Spend for Q2 code for "We're cutting corners again." The IT department would see reduced funding, hardware refresh cycles postponed, training paused until further notice. I felt like I was watching someone take a sledgehammer to a life raft while still floating in the middle of the ocean. Then came the final betrayal. Lisa's budget request for database modernization denied. Alex's security tools renewal delayed. Jake's proposal to replace a failing backup node deferred until Q3 review. We weren't just being ignored, we were being set up to fail. And so I leaned in. I updated our asset risk map to reflect the reality servers marked yellow or red critical components listed as pending failure. I compiled a 17-page incident trend analysis that made our system look like a patient headed for cardiac arrest. I documented every refusal, every delay, every risk knowingly accepted by upper management. And quietly, I made copies. One on the internal drive, one encrypted on my personal cloud, one printed and stored in my locked drawer in a manila folder labeled Disaster Contingency. Read me first. Jake peeked at it once and asked if I was preparing for doomsday. No, I told him. I'm preparing for accountability. Because when the lights go out and fingers start pointing, the only thing louder than panic is proof. The system's collapse didn't come with a bang. It came with 1,000 tiny failures. And then one big one. It happened on a Tuesday, 9:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I remember the exact moment because it was the kind of moment that tattoos itself onto your brain. I was on my third cup of coffee, elbows deep in a diagnostic script, when every alert system I had PagerDuty Slack bots, custom dashboards exploded in unison. Red banners, critical alerts, no response flashing across the screens like some kind of cyberpunk horror movie intro. In less than 60 seconds, Sage TechCo's primary server cluster flatlined. Customer database gone. Internal comms dead. Half the external services offline. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, except each domino carried a 6-figure client contract with it. The problem wasn't just that things were down. It was that the recovery processes for our newer cloud systems, the exact ones we'd been migrating to, required specialized knowledge I didn't have. Because Blake Hammond thought my training wasn't worth the budget. I worked like a surgeon in the middle of a blackout. My hands flew across the keyboard. I rebooted local nodes, rerouted DNS entries, tried restoring from backups I knew were flaky. Every move was damage control, not resolution. The legacy systems limped back to life like cranky old men dragged out of retirement. But the cloud-based architecture that stayed dead, cold, unresponsive, mocking me with cryptic errors that might as well have been written in Klingon. By 11:00 a.m., the outage had a body count. Over 12,000 client sessions dropped. 42 internal tickets marked critical. A stack of unresolved API errors longer than war and peace. Upstairs, panic spread faster than the outage. The executives were in emergency meetings trying to call clients back between PR disasters. The customer support team gave up answering phones, retreating into corners of the office like soldiers shell-shocked by friendly fire. Sales reps were hiding in the break room, whispering about lost commissions and screaming customers. Even the cafeteria's payment system crashed. I watched from my monitor as executives fumbled with cash, actual cash, to buy their anxiety-induced salads. It would have been funny if it wasn't so apocalyptic. And then right on cue, the hurricane arrived. Blake Hammond burst into the basement like the Kool-Aid man in a Brooks Brothers suit. "Claire," he bellowed, voice bouncing off server racks and concrete walls. "Why haven't you fixed this? Do you have any idea how much money we're losing?" I turned slowly in my chair. Calm. Centered. Not because I wasn't furious, but because I'd been waiting for this exact moment. "I'm doing everything I can," I said, gesturing to my screens where logs poured down like digital rainfall, "with the resources I have." "That's not good enough," he snapped, gesturing wildly like a man drowning in his own bad decisions. "This is your job." I clicked twice. Opened a folder labeled Training, Denied. Pulled up the email chain. "This," I said evenly, "is exactly what I warned you about when I submitted the cloud infrastructure training request." His mouth opened, then closed. "You're saying you can't fix this," I'm saying. I replied, "I can fix the legacy systems. But the newer architecture, the stuff we've been integrating for the past year, that required training, you rejected. I'm not equipped for optimal recovery," which is exactly what I outlined, in detail, with diagrams. His face turned the color of a fire alarm. "You mean to tell me this outage could have been prevented?" I didn't respond immediately. I wanted him to sit in the silence, to feel the weight of what he'd done, not just to me, but to every client, every overworked team member, every person upstairs, scrambling to explain why their systems were broken. Eventually, I said if I'd had the training, recovery would have taken hours, not potentially days. That's the difference between proactive leadership and reactive damage control. Behind him, I could see Jake, Lisa, and Alex standing silently in the hallway, watching, listening, bearing witness. None of them said a word. They didn't have to. He sputtered, "This is ridiculous. You should be able to handle this." training or not. I let out a slow breath. Would you ask a surgeon to perform brain surgery without updated medical training? Would you ask an airline pilot to fly a modern jet using manuals from the 90s? More silence, more crimson in his cheeks. You'll fix it. He said quieter now. You have to. I'll try, I replied. But don't expect miracles. Miracles weren't in the budget. Remember, he left. Didn't slam the door. Just disappeared in a fog of shame and panic. The outage dragged on for 18 soul-grinding hours. We got most systems back online, barely using the kind of improvised fixes that make any real engineer weep. It was duct tape over duct tape, emergency patches, restarts, guesswork. And as I sat there, lit by the glow of 1,000 blinking alerts, I realized something. This wasn't just incompetence. It was neglect, systemic, deliberate. They didn't just set us up to fail. They made damn sure we had no parachute on the way down. The system recovered, but something in me didn't. And neither did my loyalty. The next morning, I found something new on my desk. 3 things, actually. An apology email from Blake Hammond. Well, apology might be generous. It was more like an HR-proof damage control memo full of phrases like in hindsight and learning opportunity. A training approval form. Not just for the cloud infrastructure certification I'd originally requested, but for 2 additional courses on disaster recovery and hybrid cloud migration. A sticky note unsigned with 3 words, "You were right." I didn't recognize the handwriting. Could have been from anyone. Maybe someone on the exec team who'd seen the internal fallout. Maybe a quiet ally who'd been watching from the sidelines. Or maybe just someone who finally realized that betting against competence is a losing game. Whatever the case, it didn't matter. The damage had been done, and so had my time here. I signed the forms, filed the email, and opened a blank Word doc titled Resume 2.0, because now I knew. They didn't listen when it mattered. They didn't invest when it counted. They only moved when the fire alarm screamed, and by then, I'd already burned through too much goodwill. I still took the training, though. Of course I did. It was everything I'd expected and more. The instructor was an old-school engineer from the Midwest who opened the course by saying, "If your company waited until the outage to send you here, I got bad news, they're already on fire." The class laughed. I didn't. It hit too close to home. Every module peeled back another layer of what we could have done differently if only someone at Sage TechCo had taken future-proofing seriously. Disaster modeling, automated rollback strategies, proper high-availability routing, all the things I'd patched together manually during the crash, now presented with elegance and clarity. The week flew by. I returned sharper, faster, and full of ideas, but I kept them to myself. Because here's the thing about trauma. It teaches you not to waste brilliance on people who don't value it. Back at Sage, nothing had really changed. Oh, sure, they gave me polite nods in the hallway now. Hammond even managed to choke out niece work on the recovery once during a leadership call. But the system, the culture, was the same. Short-sighted, reactive, hollow. I worked in silence, updated protocols, refined our documentation. I didn't speak up in meetings anymore, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew no one was listening unless there was blood on the floor. Then one day, Lisa leaned over her desk and whispered, "You leaving?" I paused, hands hovering over my keyboard, thinking about it. She nodded. "Good. You deserve better." And just like that, I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't alone. 3 weeks later, I gave notice. Clean, professional, without fanfare. 2 weeks after that, I sat across from Hammond in my exit interview. So he said, trying to play casual, "Why are you leaving?" I thought we were finally turning a corner. I didn't sugarcoat it. I need to be somewhere that values mission-critical thinking before it becomes mission-critical. Not after. He blinked. "We're sorry to lose you. You've been invaluable." I smiled politely. If I were truly invaluable, you wouldn't have waited for a disaster to prove it. He didn't respond, just stared down at the form in front of him like it might offer a script for this exact moment. But some failures don't come with scripts, only consequences. As I walked out of that building for the last time, I felt something lift. It wasn't just relief, it was reclamation of my time, my skills, my worth. Some losses are permanent, but some exits are the beginning of everything. Leaving Sage Tech Co. wasn't an escape. It was a correction, a course reset, a necessary evolution. I spent my final week tying off loose ends. I cleaned up documentation left behind detailed instructions for the next person, whoever they were, and even made sure the critical systems had redundant paths. Not because I owed it to the company, but because I owed it to the next me. The future engineer who would sit in my corner desk surrounded by flickering monitors and duct-taped legacy systems. The one who might still believe that preparation mattered, even when leadership didn't. On my last day, Jennifer Torres called. She was the senior VP of engineering at one of the newer tech firms just across the Willamette River. We'd crossed paths once years ago at a Women in Tech conference, where I gave a talk about infrastructure sustainability. She remembered. "I heard about what happened," she said. "A friend forwarded me your name. We're building from the ground up here, no legacy nonsense. Just smart systems. Interested." Interested? I almost laughed. 2 weeks later, I was onboarded. The difference was night and day. At my new company, people didn't just ask what I was working on, they asked why. Jennifer read my proposals in full, asked thoughtful questions. She even sent follow-ups about how she could support implementation. She didn't delegate training approvals. She encouraged them. And when I submitted my first infrastructure roadmap with a line item for staff certifications, she replied, "Let's double it. If we fall behind, it's on me." That was when I knew I'd found leadership, not just management. My new team was small but sharp. Fresh graduates paired with industry vets, diverse, passionate, curious. We ran weekly war games to test recovery protocols. We documented processes before things broke, not after. We built tools that caught errors in real time. We planned. It felt like breathing clean air after years in a smog-filled basement. Meanwhile, news from Sage Tech Co. trickled in like smoke signals. Another outage hit them 6 months after I left. This one even worse. My replacement, brilliant by the way, didn't stand a chance. The institutional knowledge was gone. The patchwork systems had grown even more brittle. The documentation I left behind had been ignored during a restructuring initiative designed to make the department leaner. Rumors said the board asked hard questions, the kind that make people sweat. Hammond tried to deflect something about evolving priorities and limited bandwidth, but he couldn't deflect the reality he'd had the warning. He'd been given the roadmap, and he'd thrown it in the trash with my training request. Eventually, he stepped down to pursue new opportunities. Corporate Speak 4 was gently escorted out with a severance and a smile. I won't lie, it felt satisfying. Not because he failed, but because the system finally recognized the cost of ignoring competence. One night, I got drinks with Lisa and Jake. They'd both left too. Jake now thriving in DevOps at a cloud-native startup, Lisa working remotely for a fintech firm where her database skills were finally respected. We clinked glasses. To better basements, Jake toasted. To smarter bosses, Lisa added. To documentation, I said. We laughed. But it wasn't just humor. It was catharsis, because we'd made it out. Leadership isn't about reacting to fire, it's about preventing it. And some lessons are only learned when everything burns. These days, I sit by a window, not a metaphorical one, a literal, actual window, sunlight, a view of the river, fresh air. At my new company, I'm not in the basement. I'm not hiding behind broken equipment or shielding myself from corporate stupidity. I'm here visible, valued, and trusted. I lead infrastructure strategy now. I get asked to mentor junior engineers. My opinion isn't just tolerated, it's sought. And when something breaks, people don't look for someone to blame. They look for a solution and the person best prepared to deliver it. That's the difference when leadership actually leads. Jennifer, my manager, never lets a crisis go to waste. After a minor DNS hiccup one month, she initiated a full review, not because anyone demanded it, but because it was the right thing to do. She personally joined the postmortem and asked what resources we needed, not what mistakes we made. I remember sitting in that meeting thinking, oh, this is what it feels like to be protected, not just tolerated. A few weeks later, I submitted a proposal for cross-training our infrastructure team, so no single point of failure ever rested on one person's shoulders. She approved it before lunch. When I thanked her, she replied with something I'll never forget. Good infrastructure is about redundancy, but great leadership is about making sure you're never the only person in the room who understands what's going on. That stuck with me. Back at Sage, I'd been the only one who understood. And instead of investing in that knowledge, they tried to ignore it until it exploded. And by then, it wasn't a question of if the system would fail, but who would take the fall. Spoiler, it wasn't me. I never reached out to Hammond after I left. Never replied to the half-hearted LinkedIn message he sent 6 months later that read, "Hope you're doing well. Would love to connect again sometime." No thanks. Because here's what I've learned. Your skills, your intelligence, your instincts, they're mission critical. You don't need to wait for someone to acknowledge your worth. You don't need a crisis to prove you were right. You just need to go where you're seen before the fire starts. And Hammond, last I heard, he's consulting, which is corporate for wandering LinkedIn looking for companies that haven't Googled him yet. The real lesson, documentation, isn't just for servers, it's for stories. Because when everything crashes, receipts matter. Some companies only learn the hard way. Some leaders only understand the cost after they've paid it in blood, downtime, and resignations. But you don't have to wait for that. So here's my question to you. Have you ever had your expertise ignored, only for it to be proven right when everything went wrong? Tell me in the comments. And if you're still waiting for someone to see your worth, maybe it's time to stop waiting and start documenting. Like subscribe. And share this with someone who deserves better than a corporate basement.